Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Warno. Today I want to talk all about divisions. And when I say divisions, I mean literally what they are all about. Because I've had a couple of questions over the months, and a couple of comments from people like myself who've come from Wargame, and then one yesterday which was basically, can you explain to me what the divisions are, and what the difference is, and what their purpose is? I can explain exactly what they are in terms of Wargame. Explaining what the differences are and what they're good for is a slightly different matter entirely, but let's start with a simple thing, which is what they are and why they exist. So, in Wargame we're used to having nations, and we can build a nation deck which has access to everything that nation has to offer, although we are obviously limited by how many cards we can put in each thing and how many points we have to spend overall. That's no different for a division. Those coming from Steel Division 2 will be very familiar with this, but basically a division is, again, you're building a deck from that division, and you'll have a selection of units to choose from. So the deck building is exactly the same. The only difference is you're slightly more limited in the units you have access to for each division. Because the way you have to look at a division is it's a nation with a specialization selected. So if you build a nation deck in Wargame Red Dragon and then you choose a specialization of armored, you would end up with something a little bit similar to the 3rd Armored Division. But actually, in fairness, you get access to more stuff in the 3rd Armored Division than you would, I think, if you built an Armored USA deck in Wargame. So, in some ways, you're actually better off. Now, you still get access to a nation in Warno. You still get access to the Americans, or the USA, and you still have access to a lot of the units you'll be used to from Wargame Red Dragon. Yes, the game will play differently. That's just a simple fact. However, you still have access to a lot of your favourite units, just nothing that was designed after 1990. However, you've still got an armoured-based division, or an armoured specialization deck. You've got an infantry division, or an infantry division-based deck. You've got an airborne-based deck, or the airborne division. It's pretty similar in how it works. But the reality is, other than the fact that it's a division which is already a pre-selected specialization, building a deck is almost identical. So if I select the 3rd Armoured up here, you can see all the units they get access to. They get access to loads of stuff. There's plenty to choose from, and if I actually go in and I create a deck with them, because I think that's a good way to do it, if I just select them, this is very similar to Wargame at the end of the day. Okay, things have moved around a little bit. You've got an anti-air tab and an artillery tab instead of a support tab. The vehicle tab is gone. The vehicle tab where you just kind of stuck anything that didn't really fit anywhere else and was mostly just full of garbage without us thinking too much about it. Yes, there was a couple of select units that were totally overpowered and they ended up having to nerf that were sort of hidden away in there. But in general, it was full of junk that no one ever took. So it's kind of, they've done away with that, and wherever some of that would fit, it's now in a different part of the deck. But you have your logistics tab. In logistics, you've got supply and you've got commands. Commands are slightly different though. Here you have your vehicle commands and your helicopter commands, but infantry commands and tank commands are in their respective parts of the deck or tabs at the top. So if we go to infantry, and here we will somewhere find an engineer's commander there, and we'll find a fire team leader there. Fair enough? And with this being an armoured division, they get access to the Bradley for bringing in some of their infantry. So they've got a lot of firepower going for them, but they can call in a lot less infantry than the infantry division. So the infantry division can put a lot more infantry in their deck in terms of the cards at the top. Whereas if we got the tank tab, you'll notice this being an armoured division, well, they get access to a lot more tanks. They get a lot more to choose from down here, and they get all of these single activation point slots. And realistically, when you're building a deck in Warno, you're probably going to fill the tank tab most of the way, if not all the way, and you're probably going to always fill the infantry tab. And then fit everything else in around it. Unless you're working in a small team game and you're building specifically for a particular job on that team. So maybe one of you is playing purely armored and one of you is playing purely infantry and one of you is playing purely support. That's fine. And then you would build your deck differently, but most decks for most game modes are going to have a good mixture of everything with a focus on tanks and infantry because they are the mainstay of any battle in the game. Which, in fairness, is pretty darn similar to Wargame Red Dragon. The exception being if you had a support deck. And there are kind of support decks here, but they're not proper support decks. So the divisions that are targeted that way, but they're a bit more like everything in this is a bit more like a standard deck. You have access to a bit of everything, and yes, some divisions have more access to particular units in particular tabs. But in essence, it's actually not that different from Wargame. And I know that there's a lot of concern and people were getting very stressed out about the fact it wasn't nations. But honestly, most of the time, you're not, struggling for choice. There's plenty there to choose from. And honestly, you're going to take the big tanks. You're going to fill your deck with mostly the big tanks. Here you also get your anti-tank launchers that are attached to vehicles. Tortu launchers, etc. Because instead of the vehicle tab, they're in the tank tab. But most of the time you're going to end up taking tanks if you have access to decent tanks. But, it's pretty straightforward in terms of how it works if you've come from Wargame. And if you come from Steel Division 2, in some respects it's even easier because you're used to how these divisions work already. But if I go out of this and discard it, remember how many tanks we could put in there. Now if I switch to making an 8th Infantry Division deck and I got the tank tab, you'll notice I can take a lot less tanks. I still have access to some decent tanks. I mean, look at this. I can take 3 cards of the M1A1. Yeah, it's not the HA, but I still get access to some decent tanks. I can still take a couple of command tanks. And then I have access to some cheaper tanks, the M60s. And I also have access to Cannon Jagdpanzer because with it being a division and not just a nation deck, you get access to some other nations units from time to time. And the same will go if we got the infantry tab. You'll notice we get a couple of West German infantry in there, some Jaeger, some Milans. Most of it's still American though. But it's got a little bit more flexibility. So divisions are intended to be based on the TONE of, I think that's right, but it's the table of organization basically for that division in real life, what they probably would have. But with a little bit of adjustment, because at the end of the day it's a video game and they have to balance it. So they can't leave a entire nation or 3 divisions without a particular type of unit that could basically break the game for that division if they didn't have it. So there is a little bit of jiggling around, which, that's fair enough. You want the game to be reasonably balanced at the end of the day. But in essence, infantry here, we get loads of infantry slots. Well, the armoured one we didn't. So it is very, very similar to building a specialised deck in Wargame. I'm going to exit out of this, and we're going to talk about something else. So, the second thing was, what are these divisions good at? And that is a much harder question to answer. You could take it at face value. Armoured is an armoured division, so it's good at tanks. Infantry is an infantry division, so it's good at infantry. Airborne is an airborne division, so it's good at airborne, which means forward deployment in this case. So their infantry, if I click on them and then we go up, lots of their infantry have the forward deployment parachute. So it means they can deploy further forward in the battle, as you will note from my video where I covered talking about forward deployment. But that's not entirely true. The armored decks or the armored divisions in WARNO aren't purely armor based. You still got access to infantry, you still got access to everything you would need to build a deck. So there isn't a division where I can turn around and say that division is specifically designed to do this and nothing else. Because the overall game design and the game balance is trying to make each of these divisions balanced enough that for the most part you could play them in a 1v1 match and stand a chance. Now, let's be fair, balance never works like that. They will never truly achieve that. There will always be some divisions which are superior to others because they have a better selection of units. A division that has been strong for quite a while now is the 3rd Armoured Division. The 3rd Armoured Division has really good tanks, really good choppers, plenty of good aircraft, less infantry but good infantry. And those infantry can come in Bradleys a lot of the time, and Bradleys are very strong. So 3rd Armoured is a strong deck. That's not to say they're the best deck in the game, other decks can beat them. But each balance patch we get, it jiggles around a bit. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know the perfect 1v1 balance because I don't play that. I've had my years of playing competitively and I like to leave them in the past now. I'm beyond that and I leave that to the people who want to put in the time to do that. But in essence, yes, there's going to be an S tier of the divisions and there's going to be an F tier of the divisions. So some are going to be better than others in a 1v1 situation. In team games, that's not the case necessarily. In team games, you can play them very differently. You can focus them more on what they're designed for if you want. So yes, you could have a team game where all 3 players on your team, let's say it's a 3v3, you're all playing as American. One of you is playing as armored, and you've got an armored focus, so you're going to be the blunt pushing force, shall we say, the force that is going to smash into the enemy. Then you've got the infantry division, which are going to be, I suppose, infantry focused, good at the forest fighting, good at fighting through towns. You're still going to be able to push because you still got some good tanks. And then one of you is playing as the airborne, which means that you're going to forward deploy at the start. You're going to try and get defensive positions while your allies come and reinforce you. So you're going to be trying to take positions early game using those forward deployment troops. But, you can do that, but you've got very limited tanks. So yes, you get a couple of M11P Abrams, but they're nowhere near as good as the other Abrams, and you've only got a few of them. So you're not going to be on par with the 3rd Armoured when it comes to that. And you've got Sheridan tanks which are garbage, but they're still a tank and they still do damage. Your position is going to be played differently to someone who's playing 3rd Armoured. You're going to have a different approach to the game. But in essence, I can't sit here and say this division is only good at this, because it's simply not true. The divisions can be good at a bit of everything, especially when you build them that way. You can make them more focused and spend more of your points in particular areas if you want. But, all of them are reasonably, except possibly the British, because you hate the British, they're reasonably acceptable to play in 1v1 situations. So, yes, there's going to be some you will avoid, like the British, but the French decks are very good, the American decks are very good, the Russian decks are very good, and you'll see them used over and over again, and then each time a balance patch comes out, it shifts around what people are playing in 1v1. But when it comes to what you want to play and how you want to play it, build the deck how you want. There's no special way to build a deck. Yes, you could copy Lathans or Karma and, make your deck exactly the same as theirs. That doesn't mean you're going to play it the same way they would if you play differently to them. You've got to tailor these things to you. And you'll notice when I'm building decks and making videos about it, I'll say that. Use it as a base, but build your own deck, because at the end of the day, you're going to play differently to me. And I will take certain things for different reasons than you would take them. And sometimes I take stuff in my decks just because I want to try them out, or because I think it'll be funny to use them in a game. I don't always take things because I'm going to do this, 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 and this with them. Whereas you might plan it all out and know exactly what you're going to do in exactly that situation with exactly that unit, which is fair enough. But build the decks how you want to play them. I hope that kind of explains what divisions are in terms of how they compare to Wargame Red Dragon, in that they are basically deck specializations, but that they're also a lot more flexible than some of those deck specializations are, because you get access to so much stuff. And yes, it will vary from division to division, but they can all do a bit of everything. So don't feel forced to play them one way. Play them how you want to play them, as long as it's working for you. It's a video game at the end of the day. Enjoy it, goddammit. It's supposed to be fun. Anyhow, that about does it for this video, and it's probably going to be longer than I intended it, but it was more of a just, this is what divisions are. They're not that different to nation decks. Have a go. Play with them. See what you think. And don't feel forced that you have to play them armored because they're called armored. Just remember that your strength is the fact that you can take extra tanks, and probably very heavy tanks. But you still have infantry and aircraft, so don't forget to use them. Simple as that. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon for some more Warno.